From the beautiful Golden Isles of coastal Georgia, Golden Isles Primitive Baptist Fellowship presents Sunday Morning Devotional. Join us each Sunday morning at 9 a.m. on this YouTube channel. And now, here's our speaker, Pastor V. Vernon Eccleberry, with today's message.
Good morning. Our lesson this morning is entitled, The God of the Burning Bush, and it's taken from Exodus chapter 3, verses 1 through 10. Let me say in the beginning that this passage isn't so much about a burning bush as it's about God's redeeming grace in delivering His people through a most unlikely candidate, a fugitive from justice. Now let's look first of all at the condition of Israel at the time of our reading. In Exodus chapter 2, verse 23, we read, "And it came to pass in the process of time that the king of Egypt died, and the children of Israel sighed by reason of the bondage, and they cried, and their cry came up unto God by reason of the bondage." And then we see God's gracious response to what He saw His people going through in Egypt. In verse 24 of this second chapter of Exodus, we read, "And God heard their groaning, and God remembered His covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God had respect unto them." And that word respect means in the original that God revealed or intervened on their behalf. Now we come to the burning bush in the third chapter of Exodus, verses 1 and 2. "Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the backside of the desert, and came to the mountain of God, even to Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. And he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed." Now the burning bush got Moses' attention. So we read further in verse 3, "And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush is not burnt." And so we find that the burning bush served its purpose. It got Moses' attention, and now God is prepared to reveal Himself to him. We read in verse 4 of Exodus 3, "And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called unto him out of the midst of the bush, and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here am I." We look next at the holy ground. God told Moses to draw not nigh hither, but put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the place whereon thou standest is holy ground. Wherever God is holy, because God is holy. Moses is now prepared to hear the voice of God. So first of all, God says, "I have surely seen," this is in verse 7, "I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt." God sees that which befalls us in every respect. His eyes never slumber, and they never sleep. God saw the plight of the Israelites in Egypt, and He sees our steps as well. And we find also that God says He hears. In the 7th verse, the last part, He says, "I have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters." So God hears us when we pray. He hears us when we cry out. He hears our groans. And thirdly, God tells Moses in verse 7, "For I know their sorrows." What a great and wonderful truth this is, that God knows what we are in, what situation we are in. God knew what Israel was going through in Egypt. God knows what we face in the everyday issues of life. Next, in verse 8, God tells Moses that I am come down. That is, based on what he has seen, what he's heard, and what he knows. Now, God intervenes. God doesn't come down to see if Moses and Israel were worthy of deliverance. God doesn't come down to beg Moses to let him rescue him. God comes down for one reason. I have seen the affliction of my people. And so also we must learn that God comes to us not because of any merit that recommends us to Him, but God comes to us to rescue us because of His grace and His love. So then we see next that God delivers. In this 8th verse, I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. And next we see that God brings them out. He doesn't just come down and deliver them from Pharaoh's bondage, but He brings them out to something better. Here's the way it's worded in this 8th verse. I am come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land unto a good land and unto a large land flowing with milk and honey. Finally, God sends. In verse 10 we read, "Come now therefore, and I will send thee," God says, "I will send thee unto Pharaoh, that thou mayest bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt." It had been a long and arduous journey for Moses from the palace in Egypt to the backside of the desert. But now he finds the purpose for it all. And we too have walked our own way in seemingly a meaningless fashion, but there was order in it all according to God's divine purpose. Suddenly we'll know that like the bush that would not burn out, God has preserved us for this day.
Thank you for joining us this morning on Sunday Morning Devotional. We hope you'll be with us again next Sunday at 9 a.m. on this YouTube channel. Have a blessed Lord's Day.